figures, we just had a sermon on lawyers. So.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, some of you were listening. Okay then. According to my records, we're at Revelation chapter 17, verse 15. For those of you who were not here last time, I discovered that when I initially handed out the notes, I didn't hand out a complete set of the notes. So if you don't have notes for today, I've got some additional pages for the notes over here on the overhead stand. I'm gonna pick up a set. So, excellent. That's not a whole set, that should just, you'll see where it overlaps, it should, yeah. Yeah. And if you add that to what you already have, you should be in good shape. Okay, anybody else? Very good. I'm sure
17, verse 15.
that
Stuff you don't have from before.
yeah. Just, they should be like this, so just take one group. Yes. I'm sure that any of you who have watched any kind of drama or read a book or looked into the nature of evil at all understand that evil people not only don't get along well with good people, but they don't get along well with each other as well. And one of the reasons that good can triumph in this world from time to time is that the forces of evil sometimes work against each other. And we have somebody over here that wants to be king of the hill, and we have somebody over here that wants to be king of the hill, and if those two start fighting with each other, the good guys can just stand back and watch them weaken each other out and then deal with whoever's left over. And God is going to use this tendency of evil not to get along with other evil to punish this prostitute, the great prostitute that we have been talking about. And to understand that a little bit, let's look at Revelation chapter 17, verses 15 through 18, if somebody could read that.
Then he said to me, the waters which you saw, where the harlot sits, are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. And the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, these will hate the harlot, make her desolate and naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to fulfill his purpose, to be of one mind, and to give their kingdom to the beast, until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman whom you saw is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth.
Okay. One of the things that we need to understand is this word sitting. It doesn't mean someone is actually sitting, but it means ruling. It's not unusual, for example, we would say that, today we would say that King Charles sits on the throne of England. Was he actually sitting on the throne of England right now? No, but the throne is his rightful place as the monarch who fills the role of King of Britain. And so we say that the person sits on the throne, even if they're walking around in the back room or whatever, we say they sit on the throne. And just a little sidelight, the word cathedra means sit in Latin. And so when you talk about a cathedral, comes from the word to sit, and it means somebody has to sit there. And basically what it means is this is where the bishop or an archbishop has his headquarters. So the archbishop sits over that particular church, and so that church is a cathedral. Or we say that the Pope issues a statement ex cathedra, that means from the throne. So that's the kind of thing that we're talking about here. The great prostitute, or I think your translation said harlot, which is basically the same thing, is described as sitting on many waters. And then these waters, it explains these waters are the peoples of the world, which would be Christians and non-Christians alike. This means that this prostitute, this harlot, is going to be some kind of evil power or force that is going to rule over all the people of the world and treat them as her slaves. And of course, what has happened, the devil, he's created two beasts, and because they don't get along, the political beast is now going to attack the religious beast. And so the political beast will grow to hate the deceptive prostitute of false doctrine. And so this beast that had once been her servant, we had earlier on, she was riding on him, will turn on her and torture her. And basically what is the Lord saying here? He is saying that there will be times when systems of false doctrine have their moment in the sun. They have a certain amount of power. They have a certain amount of authority in the world. But then the time will come when the peoples of the world will discern the deception and remove the false doctrine from its position of power. And again, since the beast represents political power, there is still the false god of the government to contend with. So basically what's kind of saying, okay, you get rid of the false doctrine, but then you start worshiping the government instead, which a lot of people do today. And so people are like, oh, the government should take care of me, the government should do this, the government should do that. Not understanding that the government is just made up of sinful people, and is generally speaking worse at doing almost everything than the private sector. An experience I had when I was a young engineer, I was quoting the cost of controls that were going to be going on to a project that we were going to do for the United States Postal Service. And because it was the United States Postal Service, we had to put up with all the red tape of the government. And I had the opportunity to sit in the salesman's office for a little while and talk to him about the project. And I said, I know with all the red tape of the government and everything, how do you deal with that? And he said, easy. He says, I have everybody quote the job as if we were doing it for General Motors or General Mills or something like that. I get on all the numbers, and then I just multiply everything by 4. And that's usually pretty close. So everybody gives me their numbers, and then I just multiply all the numbers by 4 and give that to the United States Postal Service. And I guess everybody else does that too, because we get the job sometimes. You know? And so, people who want the government to take over and do things don't understand how incredibly inefficient the government is. But I've had some experience with that, doing some work for the government. And it wasn't that we were cheating them, but because of all the red tape and the regulations and everything, we did spend more time and more effort, and there were things we did that we wouldn't have to do for General Motors or General Mills or General Electric or any one of the other generals out there, General Dynamics, whoever, because it was a government project. And we had to use obsolete equipment, which drove me crazy. I'm like, I've never worked with this stuff before. And they're like, yeah, this is 10-year-old stuff, you know. And but we got it in, and it you know, eventually we made it work and so forth. But it was a lot more costly because of the inefficiencies of the government. So we need to be careful when we see in Revelation that the prostitute is falling. Is she falling because Christ has defeated her, or is she falling because of the internal warfare of the government against the false prophet, if you will? It's important to remember that the beast of the land is also known as the Antichrist or the false prophet, Babylon the great prostitute, and so forth. And once again, these many names indicate the ability of this false prophet to change its teaching, to change its appearance in order to fit what people expect, in order to give people what they want instead of what they need. Tell them what they want to hear instead of the truth, and that sort of thing. And so the false prophet has that aspect to it. So there is rejoicing that the false prophet has been destroyed, but the rejoicing is maybe not especially great because the person who did the destroying was the other beast and not Christ. So the announcement of the defeat goes forth, and it is sent forth by the angelic herald, and we have the herald's words in chapter 18, verses 1 through 3. And if somebody would.
After this I saw another angel coming down from heaven. He had great authority, and the earth was illuminated by his splendor. With a mighty voice he shouted, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a home for demons and a haunt for every evil spirit, a haunt for every unclean and detestable bird. For all the nations have drunk the maddening wine of her adulteries. The kings of the earth committed adultery with her, and the merchants of the earth grew rich from her excessive luxuries."
Okay. So the glory of the angel indicates this angel has come from the presence of God, and it is a good thing that Babylon the Great is defeated. Again, I would say the defeat of Babylon the Great is great. We just need to kind of remember there's this other beast of the government that's still wandering around. But the fall of Babylon the Great means the captives are freed, and God is calling his people out of her so that they will not suffer collateral damage as she falls. And it's interesting, why would Babylon be the name that they would choose?
Because of the number of times that they took Israel into captivity.
Okay. And Babylon, and maybe it's, once I tell you, you're going to go, oh, duh. But Babylon is supposedly the site of the original Tower of Babel, go from Babel to Babylon. So the idea that language gets confusing and the confusion of languages, and that Babylon is using this confusion of languages to deceive the nations is kind of a thing. And then, of course, the children of Israel were in exile in Babylon for a while. And so that was an evil thing. And so Babylon then became not only a physical, historical enemy of Israel, but also a figurative enemy of Israel. And so Babylon could stand for any organization that works against the church. And Martin Luther wrote a treatise in which he was describing the abuses of Rome, and he called it the Babylonian captivity of the church. And he used this figurative Babylon to be talking about the medieval church, the church under the Pope, and that sort of thing. Okay. So did we read verses 4 through 8? And if we didn't, somebody go ahead.
Then I heard another voice from heaven shout, "My people, you must escape from Babylon. Don't take part in her sins and share in her punishment. Her sins are piled as high as heaven. God has remembered the evil that she has done. Treat her as she has treated others. Make her pay double for what she has done. Make her drink twice as much of what she has mixed for others." That woman honored herself with a life of luxury. Reward her now with suffering and pain. Deep in her heart, Babylon said, "I am the queen. Never will I be a widow or know what it means to be sad." And so, in a single day, she will suffer the pain of sorrow, hunger, and death. Fire will destroy her dead body because her judge is the powerful Lord God.
Yeah. We actually have an instance of this type of punishment among the children of Israel as they are wandering in the desert. And this is from Numbers chapter 16. I'm going to begin reading at verse 25. Then Moses rose and went to Dathan and Abiram, and the elders of Israel followed him. And he spoke to the congregation, saying, "Depart, please, from the tents of these wicked men, and touch nothing of theirs, lest you be swept away with all their sins." So they got away from the dwelling of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. And Dathan and Abiram came out and stood at the door of their tents, together with their wives, their sons, and their little ones. Now, standing at the door of the tent, they're kind of like, "Oh, Moses, what are you going to do?" You know, standing at the door of the tent. And Moses said, "Hereby you shall know that the Lord has sent me to do all these works, and that it has not been of my own accord. If these men die as all men die, or if they're visited by the fate of all mankind, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord creates something new, and the ground opens up its mouth and swallows them up with all that belongs to them, and they go down alive into Sheol, then you shall know that these men have despised the Lord." And as soon as he finished speaking all these words, the ground under them split apart, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up with their households and all the people who belonged to Korah and all their goods. So they and all that belonged to them went down alive into Sheol, and the earth closed over them, and they perished from the midst of the assembly. And all Israel who were around them fled at their cry, for they said, "Lest the earth swallow us up." And fire came out from the Lord and consumed the 250 men offering the incense. On the last day, Babylon the Great will learn that she has deceived even herself, even as she deceived others. She saw herself as a queen, secure in her rule, and she did not see the destruction that was coming her way on the last day. And we see this so often. The forces of evil we're going to win. We are just going to pound all our opposition under our feet, and we're just going to take over, and we're going to show people how it's done, and then they get removed from the situation. And I'm thinking of the arrogance of the Nazis in World War II. How the Third Reich is going to just take over the world, and then the world said no, and came back at them, and eventually defeated them. And so many people who search for the things of this world and are thinking, oh, now I've got it made. I'm wealthy, I have enough to live on for the rest of my life, I'm in good shape. Don't understand that God does not look on our wealth or on our worldly power or anything of that nature. And so the Babylon the Great saw herself as a queen, did not see the destruction. And of course, there were a lot of people who were making big bucks off of Babylon the Great. Because while she was running things, she was able to be real generous to the people who were on her side. But suddenly, this source of wealth and luxury and power is gone. And the people who remain that were part of that group who were taking advantage of the power of Babylon, they will mourn. And so we see that in verses 9 through 19, if somebody would go ahead and read that.
And the kings of the earth who committed sexual immorality and lived in luxury with her will weep and wail over her when they see the smoke and her burning. They will stand far off in fear of her torment and say, Alas, alas, you great city, you might cry Babylon, for in a single hour your judgment has come. And the merchants of each earth weep and mourn for her, since no one buys their cargo anymore, cargo of gold, silver, jewels, pearls, fine linens, purple cloth, silk, scarlet cloth, all kinds of scented wood, and all kinds of articles of ivory, all kinds of articles of costly wood, bronze, iron, and marble, cinnamon, spice, incense, myrrh, frankincense, wine, oil, fine flour, wheat, cattle, and sheep, horses, chariots, and slaves. That is human souls. The fruit for which your soul longed has gone from you, and all your delicacies and your splendors are lost to you, never to be found again. The merchants of these wares who gained wealth from her will stand far off in fear of her torment, weeping and mourning aloud. Alas, alas, for the great city that was clothed in fine linen, in purple and scarlet, adorned with gold, with jewels and pearls. For in a single hour all this wealth has been laid waste. And all the shipments and faring men, sailors, and those whose trade is on the sea, stood far off and cried out as they saw the smoke of her burning. How far did you want me to go?
19.
Okay. What city was like the great city?
Okay, and he threw dust on their heads. One more verse.
And 19, okay. And they threw dust on their heads as they wept and mourned, crying out, Alas, alas, for the great city, where all who had ships at sea grew rich by her wealth, for in a single hour she had been laid waste.
Okay. Now, there are a lot of people down through the centuries who pointed at, said, oh, Babylon must be Rome. And then when Rome fell, oh, Babylon must be Constantinople. And then when Constantinople fell, they were like, oh, well, maybe it's the British Empire, or maybe it's Napoleon, or maybe, you know, and of course right now everybody's saying it's the United States. And there's this tremendous temptation by many people who try to teach Revelation, trying to match up the teachings in Revelation to the headlines that they read in today's newspapers, you know, and oh, the bear is Russia, and Babylon the Great is the United States, and most of the time they're wrong. We need to understand these are more about sweeps of history and sweeps of different philosophies, and philosophies travel from place to place on the earth. But there's always this desire among the forces of evil to try to gain power over everybody else, basically. Gain power, to gain wealth. That's their goal in life. And so this Babylon the Great is condemning all of those types of people. People who place their trust in the false teachings of this being, now they've got nothing to comfort them as they face death and eternity. Reading it just basically telling us we cannot trust the seductive things of this world. We need to place our trust in the teachings of the true Savior, Jesus Christ. And there are many times when the evil forces of the world try to deceive us into thinking that they're in charge and they're running things. And sometimes it seems like they are. But in fact, God in heaven is in charge, and they're not. And ultimately, it is those whose faith is in Jesus Christ that will, well, I'd like to say they'll win the victory, but in fact what they'll do is they'll witness Christ as he wins the victory. So we have this teaching as the forces of evil in the world fail. And then verse 20, in contrast to what we've done so far, is that the forces of heaven, the saints, the apostles, the prophets, should rejoice that Babylon has fallen. And we have that in verse 20. If somebody would read verse 20.
Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you saints and apostles and prophets, for God has given judgment for you against her.
Okay. So, the simple fact is that the deception of the false prophet has tortured and killed many saints, prophets, and apostles. And the vision calls for them to rejoice that justice has now been served against this force of evil. Then an angel demonstrates the judgment on Babylon by throwing a stone into the sea, verse 21.
Then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, Thus with violence the great city Babylon shall be thrown down and shall not be found any more. The sound of harpists, musicians, flutists, and trumpeters shall not be heard in you any more. No craftsman of any craft shall be found in you any more, and the sound of a millstone shall not be heard in you any more. The light of a lamp shall not shine in you any more, and the voice of bridegroom and bride shall not be heard in you any more. For your merchants were the great men of the earth, for by your sorcery all the nations were deceived. And in her was found the blood of prophets and saints, and of all who were slain on the earth.
Okay. This idea of throwing a great stone, like a great millstone, into the sea, does that ring any bells with you?
Well, it's like the prophecy of if you deceive children or take them
Okay.
away from Christ, that it'd be better for you to have a millstone around your neck and be
Okay.
drowned in the ocean.
And that, you can find that in Matthew 18, verses 1 through 6. At that time the disciples came to Jesus, who was the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And calling him to a child, he put him in the midst of them and said, Truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever receives one such child in my name receives me. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believes in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a great millstone fastened around his neck and to be thrown in the depth of the sea. And of course, there's an event in the Old Testament that demonstrates God throwing the enemy into the sea. What might that be?
The Egyptians?
The Egyptians, yeah. In Exodus 14. So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal course when the morning appeared. And as the Egyptians fled into it, the Lord threw the Egyptians into the midst of the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen. Of all the host of Pharaoh that followed him into the sea, not one of them remained. The people of Israel walked on dry ground through the sea, the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. So we have that. And like I say, when you're reading through Revelation, I don't know the exact state of Jordan Peterson's relationship to the Bible, but he's been struggling with it recently. And he said something very interesting. He said, before hypertexting even was a thing, or the internet even was a thing, here's this Bible, and it's one of the most hypertext books you can ever find. And what he was trying to say is, you can point at almost any verse, and it has links to other verses all over the Bible. It said if you were to lay a Bible out flat and draw a small line from one verse that connects it to another verse, you would see just this vast network of lines going back and forth from book to book. And this is especially true of Revelation. As you're reading Revelation, you should have this feeling like, oh, I've heard that before, and you should be able to go back. Fortunately, if you've got a Bible with helps in it, usually it'll reference Bible passages. You can go back and look at those and see, oh, this comes from this passage, and this comes from this passage, and so forth. And that's very helpful when you're struggling with a complex book like Revelation. You can go back and say, aha, here is something that's going on here.
Isn't there another example, although temporary rather than permanent, of God tossing into the sea? Basically when Jonah was tossed in for not doing his will.
I have a heart for Jonah. I feel like I was a little bit of a Jonah. People would say, JT, you should be a pastor. And I'm like, what, are you some kind of idiot? You know? And eventually the Lord changed my mind, but it was not without a struggle. And I think there's more than one pastor who's serving the Lord today who has a has a heart for Jonah. Was it like, when the idea first came to me, I said, "Oh, Lord, don't you mean somebody else?" You know, anybody else. I'm not your guy, just, you know. And we have that. I mean, Moses is, "Oh, Lord, send somebody else." He says, "I'm not eloquent in my speech." But the Lord chose Moses and the Lord chose Jonah. It's interesting, Jonah's a prophet. He went and he was obedient to the Lord and he prophesied to the people. And he hated the people, and when the Lord had mercy on the people of Nineveh, Jonah was upset because these people are going to come and destroy Jerusalem, or, you know, later on they're going to be an enemy. Why are you giving them grace? You know, what's the deal here? The Lord had to straighten Jonah out a little bit. But yeah, Jonah and the great fish. And of course, as a remembrance of crossing the Red Sea, when Israel crossed into Israel, the Jordan River parted and made a dry path through for the Israelites to come through, which had to just terrify the people in Jericho. Because the people in Jericho had to be thinking, "Oh, they got to get across the Jordan River and it's in flood right now. There's no way they're getting across the Jordan River." And then they get a report from one of their scouts, the river just dried up and let them over. I mean, people in Jericho, oh boy, it had to be frightening. Okay. Then we'll probably go through verse 24 and then maybe bring it in for an ending for today. This last section is a poem that expresses the terrible punishment that Babylon has brought onto herself. And this is something that is a theme of the Bible. God does not want to punish people. The punishment that people receive is a punishment that they bring on themselves. It is not something that God wants them to have. So we read that in Revelation chapter 18, verses 20 through 24. Oh, and I think we read quite a bit about that. I think you read quite a bit of that before. But we've got harpists and musicians, flute players and trumpeters. This kind of says something about having different musical instruments in church. You know, if they can have harp players and trumpeters and flute players and so forth, the Lord seems to think highly of people playing many different instruments, not just pipe organ and piano, but trumpets, bassoons, flutes.
Your dad would be proud of you.
Yeah.
Since he's spent about a decade putting high school kids with all the different instruments in
Oh, yeah.
front few pews.
Yeah, and of course, it's very interesting, when the pipe organ was first invented, pastor preached against the pipe organ as an instrument of the devil. And it's amazing, people get this idea that because we've never done it before, it's evil automatically, and that's not the case. The Lord blesses us with a variety of ways of making music, and can they be abused? Certainly. But when they're used properly, what is the name of that town? Branson. My wife and I went to Branson several times and enjoyed the shows there. And the next morning, we actually found a Lutheran Church Missouri Synod congregation in Branson. And we went there, and they had members of their congregation who were professional musicians that worked in the shows. And they were up in the balcony And we did, at that time, the Lutheran hymnal was still the official hymnal. And we did page 15 to a Dixieland quintet. Clarinets, trombones, tuba. I forget what else is in a Dixieland quintet. And it was most reverent and very uplifting and just tremendous. And, you know, when they're used properly, no problem. In page 15, which we know as Divine Service Setting 3 now, just, you know, and they were up in the balcony. They weren't out in front performing. They were up in the balcony. And it was very fulfilling. So the Lord loves to have different instruments in His church. Any other questions then? Before we bring this in for a landing. Okay. Why don't we go ahead and rise and close with the Lord's Prayer?